Grace Hartigan. March 28, 1922 – November 15, 2008. Was a second-generation American Abstract Expressionist painter and a member of the New York School. Early years. Born in Newark, New Jersey, of Irish-English descent, Hartigan was the oldest of 4 children. Encouraging her romantic fantasies, her father and grandmother often sang songs and told her stories. Her mother, however, disapproved. At 17 she was married to Robert Jackins. A planned move to Alaska, where the young couple planned to live as pioneers, ended in California, where Hartigan began painting with her husband's encouragement. After her husband was drafted in 1942, Hartigan returned to New Jersey to study mechanical drafting at the Newark College of Engineering. She also worked as a draftsman in an airplane factory to support herself and her son. During this time, she studied painting with Isaac Lane Muse. Through him, she was introduced to the work of Henri Matisse and Kierman Nicolaides' The Natural Way to Draw, which influenced her later work as a painter. Early career. In 1945, Hartigan moved to New York City, and quickly became a member of the downtown artistic community. Her friends included Jackson Pollock, Larry Rivers, Helen Frankenthaler, Willem and Elaine de Kooning, Frank O'Hara, Knox Martin, and many other painters, artists, poets, and writers. Hartigan gained her reputation as part of the New York School of Artists and Painters that emerged in New York City during the 1940s and 50s. She was often thought of as a second-generation abstract expressionist, being heavily influenced by her colleagues of the time, though she built her early career upon more of a complete abstraction. In the early 50s, Hartigan began to incorporate more recognizable motifs and characters into her paintings. In the early 50s, she actually exhibited for a time under the name George Hartigan in order to try to achieve better recognition for her work. Themes series. Paintings from the Old Masters. In the early 1950s, Grace Hartigan began painting figuratively from Old Master paintings. Clement Greenberg, an influential art critic in New York during the mid-20th century, enthusiastically supported Hartigan's abstract expressionist works, but opposed her painting figuratively. This discord resulted in her break from Greenberg. Painting from the Old Masters fostered Hartigan's growth in depicting space, light, form, and structure. Some examples of these paintings are Hartigan's River Bathers, 1953, Night, Death, and Devil, 1952, and The Tribute Money, after Rubens, 1952, working after Matisse, Dürer, and Rubens, respectively. Gender. Brides. In 1949, Hartigan rented a studio on Grand Street in Lower Manhattan. Inspired by the display windows of the numerous bridal shops concentrated on the street, Hartigan, with 2 unsuccessful marriages behind her, began to paint groups of mannequins dressed in bridal gowns. Grand Street's Brides, 1954, Whitney Museum of American Art, based on Goya's Carlos IV of Spain and his family, 1800. Was one of several works that drew the attention of critics and collectors and established her reputation. Later in her career, Hartigan said, quote, "The bridal theme is one of my empty ritual ideas. It just seems ludicrous to me to go through all that fuss." Additionally, she stated, "I paint things that I'm against to try to make them wonderful. Very often." Quote, "Oranges." In November 1952, Hartigan and close friend Frank O'Hara began a collaborative project, Oranges. Frank O'Hara had written a collection of 14 poems while a student at Harvard. Hartigan created a painting in response to each of the 14 poems, incorporating text from each poem into every image. Memorials. Over the course of her career, Hartigan painted abstract compositions commemorating the deaths of friends and family members, including Martha Jackson, Franz Klein, Frank O'Hara, her father, and Winston Price. Popular culture. Marilyn, 1962. In the year of the actress' death, Hartigan painted an image of Marilyn Monroe. Her painterly, expressive treatment of the subject differs from the impersonal manner of such pop artists as Andy Warhol. Working from several photographs, Hartigan felt that her fragmented, semi-abstract picture represented Monroe more honestly than her glamorous public image. Reisterstown, Mal. 1965. Grace returned to her lifetime fascination with shop windows with an updated, modern vision. She began working her way back to more recognizable imagery, though keeping the objects floating in an abstract, buoyant, circular composition, though she includes a plethora of recognizable objects. This is not pop art. Grace was always too passionately involved with her subject matter to accept the deadpan perspective of pop. Quote, Modern Cycle, 1967. This painting captures the American fascination and worship of machines in the 1960s. It was this spirit that Hartigan parodied in Modern Cycle, a humor that recurs frequently in her work. Autobiography. Autobiography is present in all of Grace Hartigan's work, but it took on a more central role in the 1970s. Late career. Late 1950s, 1960s. In 1959, Hartigan met and promptly married Drive Winston Price. Hartigan then moved to Baltimore to be with him. Her work around this time shifted, and she began creating more transparent paintings and watercolor collages. In an explanation of this change she said, "I have left the groan and the anguish behind. The cry has become a song." Examples of these paintings include Phoenix, William of Orange, and Lily Pond, all completed in 1962. Also in 1962, Hartigan painted Monroe, marking another shift in her work toward more anxiety-laden imagery. The Hunted, 1963, Human Fragment, 1963, and Mistral, 1964, are representations of this mindset and approach to painting. JFK's assassination and the rise of pop art, a movement Hartigan vehemently opposed, occurred around this time. Said Hartigan, "The world was ill at ease, socially and morally as well as culturally. America suddenly seemed a frightening and foreign place." Quote, Mattison 68. In 1965, Hartigan was named director of the Hofburger School of Painting at MICA, a graduate painting program that was created around her. More jovial paintings of the 60s included Reisterstown, Mal. 1965, and Modern Cycle, 1967, in which she continued to draw from popular culture, but retained her expressive hand. When the Raven Was White, 1969, Hartigan's first memorial painting since Frank O'Hara, 1966, foreshadowed future paintings of the 1970s, a memorial to her friend Martha Jackson. The work was also autobiographical. The painting represented hope amidst dark times, that there was a time before the Raven turned black. Concurrently, Hartigan was experiencing trauma in her own life, alcoholism, attempted suicide and the mental and physical decline of her husband, Dr. Price. 1970s. The 1970s marked a time of autobiographically laden imagery in Hartigan's artwork, having been influenced by the Cubists since her early education. The paintings of the 70s heavily reflected that interest. The paintings had crowded compositions, with shallow space, and collections of recognizable subjects. During this decade, Philip Guston became Hartigan's closest artist friend. Their imagery had in common that icons in the work were representations of their respective thoughts and feelings. Harold Rosenberg, an art critic with whom Hartigan had corresponded with since her split with Greenberg in the 1950s, continued to be a part of Hartigan's life in the 1970s. He argued that the enemy of art is conformity, not just to the values of a totalitarian state or to a society of mass consumption, but to one's own established style. Matteson, 88. Beware of Gifts. 1971. Another Birthday. 1971. Summer to Fall. 1971-72. Black Velvet. 1972. Autumn Shop Window. 1972. Purple Passion. 1973. Coloring Book of Ancient Egypt. 1973. I Remember Lasso. 1978. And Twilight of the Gods. 1978. Were all painted during this period. Personally, Hartigan was dealing with the declining health of her husband, Dr. Winston Price. He had been searching to find a vaccine to cure encephalitis and had tested the vaccine on himself, with disastrous results. Immediately, he experienced intense depression, was hospitalized, and experienced mental and physical decline until his death in 1981. 1980s. In the 1980s, Hartigan returned to some of the figurative imagery that was a part of her work early on in her career. Paper dolls, saints, martyrs, opera singers, and queens were subjects in some of these paintings of the 1980s. Hartigan was really struggling with alcoholism and each day trying to abstain, put much vigor into her arts practice. She worked serially with subject matter. 1990s. In 1992 she was given a solo exhibition at Acker Galleries in NYC. Personal life. Grace Hartigan married Robert Jackins out of high school. They went their separate ways after Jackins came back from fighting in World War II. Harry Jackson was Grace Hartigan's second husband. Pollock. San Miguel de Allende, 1949. In 1959, Hartigan met Wilson Price, whom she soon after married. Hartigan divorced Harry Jackson so she could be with Price. Price died after a decade-long mental and physical decline in 1981. Hartigan had a close friendship with Frank O'Hara. They had a falling out and did not speak for 6 years during the course of their friendship, but then reconnected until O'Hara's death in 1966. Philip Guston was the artist Hartigan was closest to in the 1970s. Grace Hartigan died in November 2008. Bibliography. Hirsch, Sharon L. Grace Hartigan. Painting Art History. Carlisle, PA. The Trout Gallery. Dickinson College. 2003. Lamoy, William and Joseph McCaffrey. eds. The Journals of Grace Hartigan. Syracuse, NY. Syracuse University Press. 2009. 1. Matteson, Robert S. Grace Hartigan. A Painter's World. New York. Hudson Hills Press. 1990. Marika Herskovich. American Abstract Expressionism of the 1950s, an Illustrated Survey. New York School Press. 2003. ISBN 0-9677994-1-4. p. 162-165. Marika Herskovich. New York School Abstract Expressionists, Artist Choice by Artists. New York School Press. 2000. ISBN 0-9677994-0-6. p. 16. p. 37. p. 174-177. Marika Herskovich. American Abstract and Figurative Expressionism. Style is timely, art is timeless. An Illustrated Survey with Artist Statements, Artwork and Biographies. New York School Press. 2009. ISBN 978-0-9677994-2-1. p. 116-119. New York Times obituary. Subscription required. Guardian obituary. Telegraph obituary. Grace Hartigan Papers at Syracuse University, Special Collections Research Center.